Body Parts.
Yes, and it's not the horror film. It's
Okay,
a
so
documentary.
all right, you've
Yeah,
got to,
well,
yeah,
yeah,
you
I'll
got to
let
set
yeah,
this up. You got to set this up,
yeah,
Alan.
yeah.
Um,
It's okay. So Body
well, how,
Parts.
where did you, first of all, where did you see Body Parts?
I saw Body Parts at the AFI Fest about 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
It was yeah, the filmmakers were there. Really great conversation. But this is not the horror film from a few years ago. This is a documentary, and it basically goes through the history of nudity in Hollywood, and it comes from the woman's perspective, the ones who are granting us the nudity, and so the document. This is so I will say this is an important documentary to watch, especially if you don't agree with the conversation or the issues, or if you do agree with it. This is one of those where you don't have to agree with the ultimate outcomes or the ultimate points of the film, but it presents it in a way that forces you to have to at least think about your position. And this movie goes through it, and it basically outlines the history of nudity throughout film. Goes through. The first point it makes is it talks about female empowerment, and the most interesting point I found was that it said that women were most empowered in film in the 20s and 30s. Mae West, that era, and that women, they were strong, they were powerful, they were, and when the censorship came into the movie industry, that's when the role of women started to change. And so they talked about, the fact that, there were rules as to how people could kiss, having a foot on the ground when you're on bed, can't sleep in the same bed. And in the 60s and 70s, you just saw an opening you saw nudity becoming more acceptable in that. And then it goes through, it makes that argument of, yes, nudity sells, but at what cost? And the fact that, sure, there were women out there, actresses who were very free with their bodies and very open to doing nudity on screen, but then you saw a lot of pressure a lot of actresses were going through in order to keep their jobs. Basically, they would basically, nudity for a long time felt like a rite of passage, that if you wanted to become a famous actress, you needed to do nudity early on in your career, and that was the expectation. And so it begins challenging these expectations. And then it began challenging, how nudity was forced upon women through the 80s, 90s, where, during the audition process, they'd bring in a bunch of girls and they'd all have to undress. And then all the producers would gather in one setting and just kind of say, which women, which naked woman are you going to put in this film, in that film, in that film? And it just became this ogle fest for producers. And then, you would agree then to do nudity, and you would go on set, and then they would change the terms, basically making it uncomfortable, saying, I thought I was just going to show my top, but now there's groping, there's touching. And then there's actors who just started, you're in bed with a naked actress, started to take advantage of that situation. And so it kind of goes through that history up until obviously Harvey Weinstein, and then the introduction of the intimacy coordinator, and the movie ultimately becomes this advocacy of the intimacy coordinator and how important this role is. The idea being that if an actress is willing to expose herself, be nude for the audience, that A, it should be consensual, B, it should be controlled, in the sense of an actress should know exactly what is expected of her, and that shouldn't change. And that the intimacy coordinator is there to basically protect the actress and say, this is not what was agreed upon. And also they're there to kind of, do the dress rehearsal and say, okay, here's how this scene is going to be choreographed. And so, like I said, I really like this movie. I liked a lot of what it said. It challenged a lot of things that I've felt about or wondered about, in terms of, as much as I enjoy nudity in movies, you kind of want to feel like that the actress did it of her own free will. And so this movie basically challenges a lot of our thinking, and I think that's why it's so important to watch. To say that, if we're going to move forward and have nudity, I think there does need to be standards. I think everyone needs to be comfortable with what's on there, and again, be free, do what you want to do, but be consent.
Okay, that sounds good, Alan. It
Yeah.
reminds me also of a film called Skin, A History of Nudity in the
Mhm.
Movies, which we covered on this channel. If you actually just search the channel, you'll see I did an interview with the filmmakers behind Skin, A History of Nudity in the Movies. What was interesting was how often, at least in that documentary, a really pivotal scene like came up that I think that means a lot to all of us. I think that like it actually sort of, maybe a lot of the times, maybe like this was the first time people saw nudity in a movie.
You've just destroyed all credibility in this. But I will say that scene is in the documentary, and it's ruined. Absolutely ruined.
Well, that scene is also in Skin. So check out. Maybe I'll post on the community tab our,
Yeah, I
our
mean,
original interview.
They're very tactful. There is nudity in this movie, and they do it very tactfully. One of the incredible things, Jane Fonda is in the movie, and she did Barbarella. Her husband directed it, and she was very open to doing nudity at that point. And she talks about how her husband, who she very much loved at that time, just kind of pushed things a little far to where she was uncomfortable with, and she was basically told certain things was going to happen. And then when she finally saw the movie, it didn't turn out that way.
Well, Skin, A History of Nudity in the Movies is 2 hours and 10 minutes, and it's north of 2-hour running time is completely justified. Its body parts sounds really similar to Skin.
It is. I think this one more so comes from the woman's perspective.
Yeah, the Skin, I will say, is more of a historical. It actually goes through a lot of the same things. Like there was nudity in movies in the 20s, and there were rules about it, right? Like 1 foot had to be like on the floor if you were on a bed. Like they had all these really interesting.
See, that wasn't even nudity. That was just being on a bed with someone of the opposite sex.
Then they talk about the Hays Code, which were
Mhm.
all these like moral codes that had to be in movies that got wide releases. Then like how they got around nudity, it was like, this is science. And they would actually at the theater show movies of like women giving birth, or like this is because of science.
Mhm.
And it was just an excuse to show nudity in the movies.
I don't know if you could tell in the background there, but this a big part of the movie is about the intimacy coordinators, and they're kind of showing you what they do and how it's done in the context of filming a movie these days.
Right.
And interestingly enough, the whole intimacy coordinator idea came from The Deuce on Showtime, or on HBO, I think.
Oh wow.
And in fact, HBO liked it so much that they insisted on doing intimacy coordinators for everything they do, and ultimately that went into Game of Thrones.
Interesting.